don't do it because they are very much interested in meditation or whatever, but because they gain access to particular sets of relationships which would be almost off limits if they would focus on their relationships with their ancestors. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Yeah, just one. I don't have a background in anthropology. I have a political science background, but this is very interesting. Thank you. I'm just curious about with the Buddhist sacrifice, in terms of the produce, the things that people buy.
Yeah.
Do the monks guide them on what to buy, or is it like a sort of universal list of things that?
It's a universal list. I mean, you see how this is packed. Sorry. Whoops. In how this is like cosmetic products in a bucket, and it's all wrapped in plastic. So it is made for these occasions. You just go to the market and you have a list of stuff, and you get all of this prepackaged,
Right.
including these beds. And I was wondering, where do all these beds go? I mean, every ritual, everybody wants to show off how rich they are, and they give a bed to these monks. And if you sneak around on the temple grounds, you will find a little hut probably, where beds are piled up, taken apart and piled up. And I've seen places where you had hundreds of beds. And this in a society where the government would argue that animist rituals are wasteful. Yeah.
It's probably similar, the same in Thailand and the same in Laos.
Yes.
When we were born, almost all of our parents are Buddhists. So when you tell other people we are Buddhists, in a way we don't really practice anything as a Buddhist to do. So I'm just curious how different it is from Laos and Thailand. For example, in Thailand, 90% of people are Buddhists, right? But in Laos, 70%, and the other 30% is Sasana.
Yes.
They believe in spiritual or nation. So how do you think it's different in terms of that, apart from choosing what should be on their identification?
Well, I see three major differences. On the one hand, Thailand is really trying to constitute itself as a Buddhist state. It goes in the way that the king is venerated, and also, of course, currently they're trying to get it into the new constitution, that it should be a Buddhist state. And this is very far away from what Laos says officially. So this is one thing. In Laos is a multi-ethnic, conceives of itself as a multi-ethnic state. But there is, in practice and in what the government is actually doing, there is a strong bias towards Buddhism, especially because they try to grasp some kind of national identity after socialism failed to provide that. And Oliver has written a wonderful book about that. And so that's one difference. The Lao government simply can't ignore this large amount of minorities, which also helped them to come to power in the first place. And the other thing is more subtle, and I have no idea if that is really a strong influence here, but it's also related to that. Because in Laos, if you look at the rituals in the annual rituals in which the Lao kings and chief and lords established their legitimacy, then it would also always mean to invite these mountain people who are not Buddhist and to place them on the throne for a brief moment, or to consume rice beer together with them. And so to acknowledge that these people are actually the original owners of the land, and if you don't respect them, then the fertility will be gone. And I think that relationship is not there in Thai concepts of kingship, as far as I know.
Maybe in the past, very, very long.
Yes, but what seems to be more important in the past is the relationship with Brahmanism.
Yeah.
So that you have that the Thai kings would conceive of themselves as the descendants or the successors of the Angkorian kings. And I think that is more constitutive than having. You have that in the north, for example, the Shan states, or in maybe, I have no idea, maybe in Lanada. But it doesn't seem to be part of the conception of the polity in general. So I think that Thailand is much more monolithically Buddhist than Laos.
Maybe it's like one last question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to know how does the socialist government in Laos respond to this practice of religion? Is there any particular response from the Laos government?
Which practice of religion?
The Mount of Huisan, for example.
Sorry?
The Huisan. This.
Oh, this, yeah, where people would say, well, we do both.
Yeah. And also, how does the government, the socialist government, relates this practice of religion in practicing state administration, for example, in Laos?
I cannot say very much about that. On the one hand, they have subordinated the Sangha to political ends. So basically, Sangha has the same structure as the administrative structure, but that is already before the revolution. And for one thing that they did was before the revolution, there were two major sects, the Mahanikai and the Tamayut, which also originate from Thailand, but also you can find them also in Cambodia. And they were basically that was abolished, and there was a unified Buddhist association created under the government, and so it's really completely government controlled what's happening in Buddhism. So for the government, this kind of thing, when people would slowly adopt Buddhism, is a positive thing. It's the progress of civilization and the homogenization of a national culture. So despite what they say officially, there's a strong tendency to subvert local rituals and expressions of local culture. So people might dance and tell stories and dress up in colorful ethnic costumes, but all these kinds of rituals are seen as very backward. And this is communicated more or less subtly to the villagers. So there's a very strong, strongly motivated to pick up Buddhism. Yeah, I think we have to move on.
Can I just ask one final question about the suppression of these animistic rituals? Because I heard that there were some spirit mediums who who weren't allowed to practice in Laos.
Mm-hmm.
They just simply were suppressed. They weren't allowed, and they had to go to Thailand, and people would have to cross the border to meet them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Is that a way of kind of spreading Buddhism and suppressing the animistic rituals, or do you know anything about that?
Yes, but not that much from this area yet.
Mm-hmm.
So what you have certainly also among Lao, this is not something that is restricted to the non-Buddhist people. Divination and spirit mediumship is very widespread, and it was suppressed in after the revolution. There was a kind of purification movement going on, but what actually happened was that usually especially in regard to divination, also Buddhist monks did it, and the government didn't want them to do it. So actually the market for lay diviners grew when after the revolution. And now you have spirit mediums and lay diviners all over the place. And I think they're fairly strong. And this tendency to move them out is basically over. I know from a different area that, for example, some of the local shamans were there was an oppression going on of these practices, but certainly not now anymore. So I think that yes, officially it's superstition, but the demand is so great that everybody's actually doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks so much. Just one second. I'll show you in a second. My earlier work was in central China. In the last 3 years, I've been working at the border between China and Burma, the same area where 200 years earlier you had those silver mines that Martin Chung was talking about. So those silver mines, this is now the international border, and the silver mines are this area. And I'm working with the Wa people, who are now, as you can see nicely on this linguistic map, they're spread across the international border, which is the black line. So the Wa are the red people. There are two main dialectic groups, the Baroque and the Wa. And the international border cuts them exactly in half. In China, they are one of the 56 minorities of the People's Republic. And in Burma, they have their own semi-independent state, the Wa state, which is governed by the strongest insurgent army, the United Wa State Army. And so I've been doing field work for 3 summers there, and I hope to spend about almost a year there this summer, starting this summer. And these people, they are known in Burma as drug lords and drug kingpins. I mean, this is like the center of the Golden Triangle, where all the opium in the past and nowadays marhansu and amphetamines are coming into Thailand and China. And there's no doubt that there is drug production there, but that's not everything about it. I'm interested in how ordinary people live in villages, how farmers live in villages. The drug eradication and substitution has been relatively successful in the Wa state. But even more, I'm interested in cultural production. And what I find amazing, both in China and in Burma, is that there's a lot of concern with Wa identity, what it means to be Wa. And there are lots of intellectuals in China and Burma, Wa intellectuals, who produce a lot on the internet and who constantly talk about Wa culture. And so this interest with Wa culture, I think, links up in fascinating ways with the problem of Wa sovereignty.
The Wa people are completely underprivileged people. In China, they're really, I mean, the image of the subaltern. They're dark. You know, in this area in Ximeng, reggae is big now. So they have a culture of subalternity, which, you know, reggae makes perfect sense. Bob Marley, because they are dark and they're darker than the Chinese, and they, very often they don't have paper. So this whole kind of blackness about them, which stands for subalternity. And in Burma, of course, they're also subaltern. I mean, they're known as, this is a kind of drug-infested, poor, mountainous region, which is not really sovereign. It's just governed by an army. So it's a de facto state, which internally is actually relatively stable. So this kind of area, which is the so-called Wa state, is completely, I mean, it's like somewhere in the province in China. There's absolutely no danger, and you can move around and so on if you get in. But it's not a state. And saying Wa state is already sensitive. I mean, in Chinese you would say Wa Bang, and it's like a bang doesn't really properly sound like a state. It's clear, this is not a nation state. This is something else. And so the interesting way in which these two things are linked, the concern with identity and the concern with sovereignty, is that they make perfect sense to each other. So what do I mean by this? I'm inspired by a historian by the name of Prasenjit Dwara, who wrote a wonderful book about Manchu War. Manchu War was a puppet regime in Manchuria, which was set in and governed by the Japanese. And the Japanese in, I think, 1932, it was something, 1935, they put in Pu Yi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, as a puppet king of this country that they called Manchuria. The interesting thing that Dwara writes about in his book is that in this puppet regime of Japan, you had a lot of cultural production about Manchurian and Chinese culture. And the main claim of this cultural production was that this is authentic. These are the real Chinese people, these are the real Manchurian people, and therefore Pu Yi, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, which was a Manchurian dynasty, stands for the sovereignty of this puppet regime. Of course, they didn't say puppet regime, they said like of this nation. Just in very similar ways in which Wa intellectuals in the Wa state, in Thailand, in Burma, and in China do things like that on the internet. I think this is absolutely fascinating. This is from the website of a friend of mine by the name of Aigor, who works in the propaganda ministry of the Wa state in Bangsang. And he organizes news and all this, but in his kind of leisure, in his free time, he does things like that on the internet, collage, you know, which stands full of items of like modernity, a villa, development. Like this is also stands for the news station that he's working for. That's the title of the thing. So this is modernity spreading, but it's also Wa. It's real Wa. It's authentic. And so that Wa reality, you know, this kind of invented tradition of what the real Wa is about. Just like also, you know, the primitive Wa in the past were headhunters with the festivals and stuff like that. That is ultimately the claim to sovereignty of the United Wa State Army, because they represent the real people, the people as they are. So in cultural production like that, it's a bit like a self-objectifying movement. You say, this is me, and I'm real, I'm authentic. I'm an authentic Wa person, and therefore, we as Wa should be sovereign and have our own state and army. Similar things you have. So now we come to the great thing like the video. Similar things you have in music is like the best things, like marching songs and military songs, where you always have this image of like the daring soldiers and the beautiful girls. So this is the capital of the Wa state, Bangsang, at the border. This is the Maximo leader, Bao Youxiang. And all the song is about we respect our leaders, we are proud to be Wa, we defend our country. Mongwa is the Wa state in Wa. Hmong is like the same as. This is the best. So, I guess you got the gist. I mean, this is fascinating on so many levels, but I think the most fascinating thing, what I think is really significant, is this link between authenticity and sovereignty. So authenticity meaning these are ordinary people. Of course, the leader is there, Bao Yixiang is there, he's the big man, he's the king of this place. But who is represented are the ordinary soldiers. And you could say half of the songs are either about the daring soldiers, and the other half is about beautiful women. And both of them stand for the people as they really are, so the real Wa people. There's no question of being mingled with Shan Dai people, or with the Chinese, or with the Burmese. That's the reality of the place. Everyone speaks 2 or 3 languages, and the lingua franca is Chinese, and it's completely mixed. But what you have represented here is pure Wa-ness. And so that pure oneness is this thing about authenticity, where the consequence of which is a claim to sovereignty. That's my idea. And you have I'm writing this into papers as well. In the paper I have other sections. So one section is on music, and then you have other sections on militarism and on different kind of other forms of cultural production, such as local gazetteers. They're also really fascinating. Gazetteers in China, this is an ancient tradition in many places going back to the Yuan dynasty or even earlier. In most counties of China, you had a local gazetteer which was recording all the stuff that was happening, geography, even some ethnography sometimes, climate, politics, society. These are gazetteers this is a gazetteer of the Wa state. In the Wa state, in the past, of course, you didn't have these things, but in the last 20 or so years, you have various gazetteers written with the help of retired Chinese school teachers, mostly, who are themselves ethnic Wa, and they come to places in the Wa, and then they do the same thing that you would do in China, but what about the Wa state? So this one was edited for the 20th anniversary of the Wa state in 2009. So the Wa state was founded in 1989 after the Communist Party of Burma disbanded, and then a lot of rank and file and Wa soldiers started the United Wa State Army on the basis of the former Communist Party of Burma. And 1989, 20 years later, they added this material, this defuncture, in Chinese. Most of it is in Chinese. There's some stuff in Burmese, some in English, but the main chunk of the book is in Chinese. And as you can imagine, most of the book is about a kind of invented history of the Wa state. There were several Wa states in the past. It's very complicated. It was never a centralized yuan, but the whole kind of effort here is going into writing a semi-nationalist history, where of course a lot of it is about Wa identity as well. Who are the Wa? And written in Chinese language. I mean, that's another level of complication. But I don't have it here. The first page, there's a preface, like an introductory note by Bao Yixiang, the leader of the Wa state, which says the Wa are an ancient people in the forest of nations, which are typical Chinese formulations, like the forest of nations. But this is all a nation-state imaginary. So there are many other people around us. We are one of them, and this is us, and we should be standing for ourselves, which are all kind of typical moves for a kind of Chinese modernity, you could say Chinese nation-state modernity. The Wa are doing the same, and I find this totally fascinating. And you can see various elements of this in their cultural production, such as in songs or in local gazetteers. This is the only kind of magazine that exists in the Wa state. There's one magazine which comes out weekly, mostly in Chinese as well. And yeah, that's basically the main idea. And this stands opposed to the general image that the Wa state has in the media, both in Southeast Asia as in the West, as a place governed by drug lords and warlords. I mean, it's true that drug production played a major role and still does in the Wa state, but that's not everything about the Wa state as a political entity. So this link between sovereignty and authenticity, I think, is extremely interesting as well, ultimately, to come to our topic, because this is something in which the state, the kind of everyday state, the felt state as a polity, is created in people's lives. People constantly, I mean, every man wears military attire in the Wa state, every ordinary man. That's like, this is basically modernity. It comes through the military state, and it comes with this claim that the military state, with their grand leaders, represent the authentic Wa people. So this idea of sovereignty and authenticity is really important to create the state machine, which is happening in the Wa state just like elsewhere. That's thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I also work on the borderland where the Chan and the Wa live together, and I'm also interested in the relationship between also the identification of the Chan identify the Wa, because in my area between Thailand and in the south, there are two Wa polities existing in my borderland. One is the white Wa, the Chan call these people white Wa, and they call the Wa from the United States Army red Wa, which related to the connection of the United States Army with the Communist Party of Burma, and also they distinguish the red Wa from the white Wa, who are the former leader of the National Army, whose leader were the former. They really Wa from the Ying from the north, but because these two polity had different political development during the ethnic insurgency, and that's I think I mean that I also I don't know, I have no information about how they identify themselves, who are authentic Wa, because in your case, the Wa have the authentic Wa is the red, the United Wa State Army, but then in my borderland, another polity, the white Wa, when the Chan say talk about these two Wa groups, Wa polity, they said, oh, the red Wa is bad because they're producing drug, going opium, and why the white Wa who also have relationship with Khun Sa, and also who speak also Chan. They say, oh, this is a good Wa. Or, yeah, I just want to share my.
I'm just exploring as well. I don't know too much about.
And then no one is also study much about the United States Army this polity in the along the border between Thailand and.
Yeah. So I'm just exploring as well, and I'm just reading these different histories. But my kind of explanation or answer to this would be so when the United States Army under the leadership of Barry Chiang and his brothers won against Khun Sa in 1996. They took over the area that Khun Sa governed.
The white Wa took over from the Khun Sa, but I also had an agreement with the Burma army that okay, we would like to control this area after Khun Sa.
And so they're still governing it, and then they forcefully resettled about 150,000 people, more or less. They're different.
Yeah, but many of them moved to Thailand. Many of them left the area, went back to their old upper North Chan state or in the Wa state.
Yeah.
Not many left. Yeah. But there's some.
I mean, but there must be still people left. So of these 150,000 people.
Not that much number. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, who were resettled in some way or the other, and they just put them on trucks and took them down to this border area to Thailand. And these people, this is governed as a military zone. I mean, I know quite a few people who were commanders or are commanders in this military zone, which, I mean, this is totally governed by the United States Army in a very strict way. I've never been there, but this is, all like kind of military exceptional area governed directly by the United Bar State Army. Yeah, and so for that way, I mean, this is completely even more militarized than you know. If you are in the northern Bar states, which is bordering China, it's really a bit like a Chinese province. It's very quiet, and I mean Chinese province also in the kind of militaristic sense. But everything people tell me about the southern area, just because it was only recently resettled, like one generation ago, or 20 years ago, and it's still under like kind of, it's like an occupation. So for that reason, I suppose the so-called white Wa, I mean that's basically the United Bar State Army. Whereas the other ones, the red Wa, they're just people, they're different Wa people who are in this whole region, and they.
The red Wa is the United Bar State Army, what the chart means, but the white Wa is the true former leader of the Wa National Army. They call white Wa.
Just maybe it's a little bit irrelevant, but when you talk about the war coming into Myanmar proper, from my experience, maybe your explanation is more about the political identity or the constructed identity, their authenticity is in a way emphasized. If you come into mainland Myanmar, they play different faces. Sometimes they're Chinese, sometimes they're Wa, sometimes they're Burmese. A lot of property in Mandalay are bought up by, I thought they were Chinese, but actually they were Wa. But then it's all written in Chinese. You think they're Chinese are buying up all the property land in Upper Burma. Then you find out they're Wa, married into the Burmese society. And the impression I get in Myanmar is they're extremely wealthy, not the poor Wa. The Was who have, who are doing business, crossing the border all the time, are really wealthy, and they are very good donors. The monasteries and nunneries always talk about the Was being generous donors, but they don't know how to do the protocol properly. They come in hot pants, so the nuns have to teach them how to bow properly, but they are usually very generous. And they come as Chinese.
Yeah.
They don't, but they are Wa.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you cannot. All the kind of wealthy Wa, I know they have either Burmese or Chinese papers, and can. So there are some people who can become Burmese, and other people can be. I mean, they're kind of Chinese, and they can say they are Chinese. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of mixture, and I think it always was in history in these areas. That, I mean, that's the famous thing in anthropology. Leach wrote about that people could become Kachin, and then they could become Shan, and both in a lifetime and like interchangeably. And that's still true now. But even though that is true, that everything is so Chinese and people speak Chinese and all this, that there's this effort to be Wa, or there's a concern with what it means to be authentic Wa, which is very closely linked to this concern with the Wa state, the problem of the Wa state, that the Wa is really just a de facto state, somehow state, quasi state. It's not a real state, and that's a concern for people. So that's what I think.
Curious on the concept of, or the sort of notion of statehood or the state. I'm just wondering, have they articulated sort of how they conceive of the state? I mean, in terms of the state as a distinct entity from, for instance, society, or perhaps more simplified, or who or what the state is within their particular context. Is it the political system? Is it about the institutions? Or
I mean, just like for us as observers and in political science, this is a very complicated question. I think so it is for people there. I mean, people who verbalize and articulate this question. One of my friends is a Mishu, like a Wenshu, like a writer in a local government, and we had long discussions about this problem, like what it means to say Meng Wa or Wa Bang. So Wa Bang is the Wa state in Chinese, but Bang is not like, it's completely clear that this is not like Borgia, this is not a proper nation state, but it's something like a federal. Bang is also used for federation, and in tradition it can mean state in Chinese history, but it's also clear that this is not like what is nowadays a nation state. And Meng Wa, I mean they use Meng Wa. Meng means country in Wa, just as in Thai, in Shan. but Hmong is like a kind of segmentary thing. Hmong also means community, and it also means us and place and so on. But it means country. So my friend, like the Wenshu, my friend, the local writer, he said it's actually wrong to say Hmongwa. We shouldn't say Hmongwa. We should say Hmongman Hakdaeba, which is Hmongman is like the country of Burma, and then Hakdae means just the lands, the place. So we should say that the country of Burma and the lands of the Wa. That would be the formal title of the country or of this place of the Wa state, which in English formally is called Special Region Number 4 of the Shan States of the Union of Myanmar. That's the official title. So even though just titles, then there's, I mean, you're absolutely, behind that there's a much more fundamental problem. What does this mean to people? So I'm trying to think about this. You know, the best and I think the best ethnographer and anthropologist of the Wa, Magnus Fiskesjö, who's at Cornell, he's written a lot about Wa history as well, and basically he always says previous to 1950, previous to the arrival of modern armies, the Chinese Kuomintang, the Chinese communists, the Burmese, and then all these kind of different armies. Previous to that, the Wa were completely autonomous, and they are stateless people. I mean, in Scott's famous The Art of Not Being Governed, the Wa are one prime example of stateless people, and he talks quite a lot about them in various chapters. Because these are the mountain people who are egalitarian and don't have a state. But at the same time, they have, I mean, there are various ways of conceptualizing what happened there. It's probably a lineage government, but also in villages, and there is some kind of hierarchy as well. It's not completely egalitarian. So it's a complicated question. And I mean, that's actually, to ultimately, for me, for myself, is one of the questions that really drew me into this area, which I find absolutely fascinating. How, I mean, people who 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago, were still headhunters. The last reported case was 1969, I think, in what is now the Wa state. That people still cut the heads of their enemies and brought them back to the village. And then 2 3 generations later, they're like a military state in Burma, and how this transformation happened.
I'm trying to follow really these concepts, sovereignty and authenticity. And I'm thinking whether when we have authenticity, that's why we need sovereignty, or we have sovereignty, that's why we need to show authenticity, or we need both sovereignty or authenticity at the same time. I'm trying to think about the answer, and I was thinking about people underrepresented in their society. I'm not sure if you have any other explanation why we need either sovereignty or authenticity, or why do we need both?
I don't know if we need both. I mean, everything I'm saying, and I'm taking this from Prasen Chitwara, is that there's an interesting connection between the two of them. So when you wonder about what is your true self, your true identity, this is like the best justification for sovereignty. I mean, it's because I mean this is the problem of mass representation in modern nation states. I mean, every nation state claims that they stand for the people. You know, I mean, it's not because it's a king or it's some other system. It's because they stand for the people, the People's Republic, and what have you. So the idea of modern sovereignty is that they stand for the people. Therefore, this concern with authenticity in cultural production kind of interestingly links to sovereignty. That's I'm not saying either or. I mean, I'm saying there's a link between those two. I don't want to just focusing on me. We should have a general discussion.
It's another 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah. Maybe should we all sit in front so that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. Okay, more questions. But it's a daunting task to summarize. But I think it's different approaches to state formation. How does state actually happen, so to say, that took place? Mainly, we I realized that Tian Xiong and me, we are talking about a similar area, and so do Oliver and Guido. And I suppose all four approaches have something to do with how modern nation states ultimately were established.
If I compare my case with yours, then it almost appears pre-modern in the sense that people seek and cultivate particular relationships and particular domains like Buddhism in order to belong to the state and to have a relationship with the state. But that relationship is still based on difference. So a more Muang type of sovereignty would not be based on the idea that the Wa have, that they have sovereignty because they are authentic. Because everybody is the same. Everybody is a Wa, and therefore they are sovereign. So that it's an idea of sovereignty that is based on identity. But the classical Muang principle, and especially in Laos, is actually based on alterity. You are sovereign because you are in a hierarchical relationship with two elements at least. So the Buddhist king and the peripheries can be peripheral smaller kings or villages or Ka, so non-Buddhist uplanders. And the sovereignty comes because you are different from the people you actually rule. That's the sovereignty, because you encompass them on a particular level. Because you encompass the difference between yourself and your opposite. And that is sovereignty. And what the Zhou are basically doing is they have two types of sovereignty in a way. One type is they accept themselves to be in the inferior position of that duality, so they have to mimic. So mimetic is pretty much what it does. They have to do like they were Buddhists, because that's an avenue of relating to the state. But on the other hand, they can still say, we are Zhou, and we have these ancestral relationships, and mother and father wouldn't like to be addressed with different rituals, so otherwise they would make us ill. So there's still this difference built into this construct, into the concept of the state.
Forgive me, one of the things that you all framed yourselves with was the idea of sort of an upland Southeast Asia look. And I heard some of this in Professor Ma's talk, but I didn't hear much from you all about topography, right? How the status of being upland and having hills and you know, the physical geography of these places plays into the states and the identities that are being discussed. Do you want to talk about that?
Can I synthesize from your perspective? I think it's a very dynamic way to think about reaction between the local and the state, but the style are different. For example, Hans' case, I think it's very interesting to think about the similarity and the difference, because it could be regarded as a fashion to respond to the state, thinking about those counties, for example, Lantan, those frontier counties along the border. They have to perform to the state, to the market, to the mass media, about their real culture, or real identity as Chinese minority. But the Wa state just follows that fashion, perform for different people, for their own people, about who we are. And then they think about their way to create their culture and to create their authority. Based on similar fashion for different audience. So that is very interesting to think about historical perspective. Thinking about the state, when the state was not based on the border. The interaction between local and the state was there. that is the reason why silver mine becomes so significant, and then people are very mobile. The mobility creates the diversity of identity. But once the state becomes stabilized border, that means state for local people means borders. So for the state become stabilized as borders, then the object of reaction changed. So the way for interaction should be moved from, for example, industry or cultural or creation or how to define Buddhism, for example.
I mean, drawing this back to your question, I mean, the topography, in a way, this part of the world, what is so obvious is like the mountains and the valleys, and the difference between in the valleys you have civilization, and in the mountains you have the wild people, the Ka people, who, the Wa, they're called in all sources in Chinese Kawa, just like the same root. So these are the wild people from the mountains, who are dirty and black and uncivilized, naked, all these things. And in the valleys you have the civilizations, the armies, the Buddhism, Chakravartin kind of realms, where there's propriety and civilization. Civilization is in valleys. But that has changed a lot, like Matt said, with now international borders, but also with modern transport. I mean, modern transport makes a massive difference. So in the Wa state, you have pagodas now just about everywhere. You even have like Wa pagodas. I mean, it would be fascinating. I haven't gone so much into this. Like Wa spirit house pagodas, which are complete kind of paradox in themselves. But it's something similar to what Guido was talking about, like this kind of formalization of ancestor religion, which in the past you didn't have like as a formalized thing, because by definition it was informal, so to say. So our idea is, I mean, close to Scott. Scott was important, or Leach, like these famous anthropologists who wrote precisely about the interaction between valleys and hills. But then Scott, for instance, stops about 100 years ago. He says modern transports, that's the end of my argument. Whereas the kind of questions we've been asking, mimesis, religion, even like with the silver mines, I mean, there are other ways of looking at this interaction than just opposing it between valleys and hills.
James Scott had this argument of that the expansion of the state kind of stops because of the friction of terrain, because of the mountains, but they are kind of emergent processes of state formation within the uplands. So it's not necessary to have a lowland state encroaching the uplands, but we are interested in processes within the uplands that maybe also radiate into the lowlands. So Laos is the Lao PDR, Lao People's Democratic Republic, emerged in Huapan, in this upland region, because there the communists recruited the ethnic minorities against the feudalists, and so the socialist state of Laos emerged in the periphery, so to say.
As did the Chinese state, in a way. I mean, Maoism in general is like going to the periphery, and I mean that kind of original rebel nature of Maoism is doing exactly that. So they always retreated into the valley, into the mountains, into the wild area, and then came back as a strong army, just like the last state army.
But that would basically replicate Scott's logic in a way, because then you have to turn wild in order to become sovereign again, to make a real revolution. That's it.
Yeah.
And in my case, it's quite funny because it's a high plateau. That means if you go up like you go on a mountain, but then upwards it's just flat. And for that, and it's significant that the largest group on this high plateau, the Loven, the Zhou, has always been called, since the late 19th century, that they were much closer to the Lao. So early French observers would say these are not really Ka. So these are actually, you'll find people who speak Lao and who write Lao in almost every village. And they had a hierarchical relationship with their neighbors. There's a neighboring ethnic group called Nyaön, which is also on the plateau, and they were more or less the car of the Lorraine. So it's an interesting mixture. And there was a millenarian movement that founded a kind of pseudo-state in the 1910s to 30s.
For my case, when we think about upland, there was no difference between upland and lowland. Thinking about the process of the mining industry, only because those basins supporting were the localities supporting the transportation system. So in this case, saying lowlands or mountain, the lowlands were the places supporting the transportation system, liquids the mines to the, for example, Yangtze River or to Irrawaddy River. So there's no difference, same from mountain to the lowland when we think about the system of mine.
Yeah, I have a question about Laos in particular, because when we talk about the process of state formation, I'm just curious how, to what extent you also take into account the government policy on internal resettlement that is very much focused on moving ethnic minorities from the mountainous area to the lowland, and to what extent that process also helped shape and reshape the interaction between like the dominant group and the ethnic.
Yes, I mean the entire resettlement process always poses as a kind of modernist development measure, but in fact it is much more connected to what happened hundreds of years ago, when after warfare, the centers would not try to attempt to stretch the administration towards new territories, but rather to get people out of these territories and get them closer to the centers. And of course that has happened all the time. On the Bouleven Plateau it is not that apparent. There was some relocation, but it was clearly related to the war. So they got people out of the war zone. But in a different area, in northern Laos, where I'm working, it is very, very clear that this is more about state control than about bringing wealth and whatever to the villages. Because usually resettlement means that that people get crowded in places which are more accessible, but where you have less land and less access to natural resources, and sometimes it is also done in a way that really basically affects the destruction of local identities, village identities and ethnic identities, by mixing people up or by putting lots of ethnically different villages together. So I would definitely see that as a means of centralization, which is very, very much, which is couched in a modernist rhetoric, but is very much pointing at a very classical way of state control over.
But do you also, like, maybe as a follow-up question is, do you also see the people or ethnic minorities after they are resettled to the lowland and they see that things are not improving? Do you also see like people or certain trends that they go back to the mountainous area?
I haven't had that in my own. I know that this is happening, but the areas where I'm doing research, this is not something that I have data on. Maybe, what about you, Oli?
Yeah, the thing is, in Burma, many villages have been kind of, different villages have been put together along the roads. So we have now bigger multi-ethnic villages, and the problem is that they don't have enough land. So they still have this concept of the old village. This is then the place where they still have some upland rice fields. They go long ways nowadays with the motorbike, but they have to travel a lot going back to the fields, and it's a big problem now, the land scarcity, in particular after the government declared some forest regions off limits for the people, so this is protected area. Of course now they are doing a lot of logging from the government side, but they say, no, we protect the forest, you are not allowed to do upland cultivation anymore. So all these aspects entail a lot of problems for everyday livelihoods of the people in this. I don't have data on this multi-ethnic villages about conflict, but usually I think the kind of solution is they build a Buddhist temple and make it a kind of Lao village, even though it consists of many different ethnic groups. So then it's now we are Lao cultural village. So they get the label Bambata and now and then the concept of multi-ethnic solidarity for the country of Laos, and so it's maybe also one step to like establishing this kind of national Lao national culture in Buddhism, and then the small ethnic communities within the multi-ethnic villages and towns practice their own rituals in the house on the household level, but not on the village level anymore. I think this is a big difference than before when they were more homogeneous ethnic villages.
It basically boils down to what people tell me there, that you do Buddhism in the village and animism in the house.
Yeah.
That's really what they say.
Which maybe is the way to conclude. I thought we could conclude like with something into the wild, and we talked more. So we talked about the mountains and revolution, and the states are happening there. Thank you very much for having us.